Hi, I'm Ricci.
And I'm Farrell.
And we're from Written Word Media. We're really excited to be here today to present to you secrets of successful authors.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about who we are, a survey that we did with some authors and how we got our results, which resulted in 6 secrets of successful authors, which we'll share for you. We'll summarize what we've talked about and tell you how to get the presentation after we're done.
Yeah, so before we jump into who we are, just so you know, we will be sharing the presentation. There'll be a link to a site where you can go and download all the findings for yourself as well as the presentation. And we'll be writing a blog post about this on our blog at writtenwordmedia.com, where we will outline all of these findings as well. But you guys get to hear it first, so you get the scoop on all of these findings. And we hope you enjoy the presentation. So who are we? We are the folks who run Written Word Media, and Written Word Media runs the 4 websites: Free Booksy, Bargain Booksy, Red Feather Romance, and New in Books. Hopefully you've heard of at least one, if not all 4 of our web properties. We've been around for a while, and we have about 700,000 readers across these 4 properties. And what we do is we email these readers and post on our websites to these readers what books they might like, different book recommendations. And then we work with over 32,000 authors to help them get those books in front of the reader audience that we have. We really love working with indie authors, and we've had a lot of success helping indies launch their careers and helping indies continue their careers so that they land up in the 100K camp.
So let's talk about our survey and who we surveyed and how it's all set up so you understand the information that we're about to give you. So we surveyed our authors. Like we talked about earlier, we have about 32,000 authors that we work with, and we wanted to know what those authors are doing to achieve success. How are they spending their time? How are they spending their money? What other habits do they have? And how can we use this data from successful authors to help emerging authors who are earlier in their career, give them the secrets to have this success maybe a little bit earlier than they would naturally. And the way we did this by splitting authors based on their income. So we asked them, have you ever made $100,000 per year in book sales? And the reason why we pulled $100,000 is we thought that's a number that means financial success for an author. Not everybody writes for money, but for those people who do, we thought $100,000 in a single year from book sales sounds like something that would mean financial success for an author. And so we're calling those authors 100Kers, or people in the 100K club. And on the other side of the equation, we have the emerging authors, people who are just starting out. And these are people who make less than $500 per month selling books. Now, this is going to be the overwhelming majority of authors who are just starting out. And so we looked at the differences between these 2 groups to try to figure out what can you do as an emerging author to make yourself more like a 100K author. So on to the results, and let's tell you what we found in the survey.
Great. So one of the first findings, or one of the first secrets, is that it does take time to be successful. So as you can see from the graph in front of you, almost half of the 100Kers have been writing or been in the writing business for 3 to 5 years, with another 40% of them being in the business for 5+ years. Absolutely no one made 100K in their first year of publishing, which should not be surprising. Stories of people who hit it big right away and get rich schemes and all of that tend to be few and far between, and is not really a tactic that we can replicate or share with you guys. So what we're going to do is tell you the things that we know will work over the long term. And what you can see from this is that the longer that you write, the more books that you publish, the more likely it is that you're going to be successful. So the big takeaway here is that building financial success takes time. And the way to think about it is like anything else. Each book is an asset that you have. And so when you publish your first book, you now have one asset, and that asset is slowly going to start paying dividends over time. And then as you add additional books and additional titles to your backlist, those assets are going to start creating revenue for you over time. And so the longer that you've been the longer you've been writing, and the more titles that you have, the more likely you are to be successful. So if you're just getting started, that's great. Know that you're taking the hardest you're taking the first step, which is usually the hardest part, which is you getting started. And once you're getting started, you really want to stick with it. If you've been doing this for 2 or 3 years and you're still at 100K, don't get discouraged. You might just be a year or two away from that.
And so just before Ricci sort of takes this point home for us, just a quick note here. This, in their own words, is something that we really feel really good about. So basically, in that survey, we not only asked for data, but we asked for advice. And so we took the advice given from the 100Kers, the people who had earned 100K in a year, and we put it in these slides and tried to match it up against the data, because data doesn't always tell you the whole story. And what we thought was really powerful was when we got a piece of advice from one of these people that lined up with what the data was showing, it makes us feel really good that this point is true and something that we can sort of recommend to the emerging author community.
So what we heard from one of the 100K authors in our survey was, don't expect to get rich. Don't expect to sell a lot of your first book. This is a journey. And that lines up with the data that we have, that not very many authors are going to hit it big with their very first novel, and that to be successful and to do it right, you got to expect that this is going to take some time.
Great. So we found an apropos little cartoon here for you that kind of drives our next point home for us. But this is just Snoopy here, basically asking for an advance of his new novel that he has written, and asking for some money before it's written. And so this is representative of the old publishing model, right? Which basically where you would ask a publisher to get published, and if they said yes, you'd get an advance. That's not the case so much anymore. And you can see what we found is that an overwhelming amount of both 100K authors and emerging authors are self-published. Now, this is no surprise. Most of the authors that we work with are self-published, so the data is somewhat skewed in that direction. But what you'll notice is that nobody from the 100K club is traditionally published. You'll also notice that there's a large portion of the 100K club that's over in that hybrid bucket. And what hybrid means is they have some books that are signed through a publisher, and they have some books that are independently published themselves. And what we're seeing is a new publishing model where independent publishing is the most viable first step to success. And a lot of authors stay indie and write all their own books and run their own show the whole way. And some authors use indie publishing as a way to get a traditional publishing contract. And then they do both. They have some titles that are independent and some titles that are signed to a publishing house. And so what we're seeing is that indie publishing is a great first step regardless of which way you want to end up. And a lot of people end up staying there and are able to be really, really successful. This just hits a couple of those points home, that really the way to think about independent publishing is not an alternative to traditional publishing, but really it's the new pathway to traditional publishing. If you talk to a publisher these days, they're going to tell you, you need a following, you need a book, you need some traction before they're going to look at you anyway, and you can get all of that with publishing independently.
And just a note on the economics here, another reason that 100Kers are more likely to be in the indie publishing bucket is that when you publish yourself, when you self-publish or independently publish, you get 70% of the royalties from each of your titles. When you publish with a traditional publisher, you get an advance, perhaps, but advances are actually becoming less and less common. So generally you won't get an advance. And then you may only get 10 or 20% of the royalties from every sale of your book, but you're still expected to do a lot of the marketing work and the book signings and everything that goes along with it. So if you're independently published versus traditionally published, you can sell fewer books potentially, but because your royalty is 2, 3, 4 times as much as what you'll be getting from a traditional contract, you still end up making more money.
Great. And so just again, in their own words, this is sort of an inspirational quote from one of our 100Kers. It says, "Never give up. I was told that I could never make it, and I proved everyone wrong. And this person was rejected by over 300 agents and publishers. And she calls it a blessing in disguise." So, data supports this, that traditional publisher doesn't necessarily mean financial success anymore. In fact, a lot of the people in the 100K club are going indie and, like Ricci mentioned, taking advantage of a 70% royalty and being able to make more money and run their own show.
Okay, so our third secret pertains to marketing. As you can see from our little cartoon here, the holy grail of book marketing used to be getting on Oprah, because whatever book Oprah picked used to hit the New York Times bestseller list pretty much instantaneously. Oprah no longer does her show and picks those books, and times have changed, and there are lots of other tools out there where many more authors can be found through marketing, through the advent of social media and search engine marketing and organic marketing. So what did we find when we asked our authors about marketing? Well, what we found is that paid marketing is critical to success. So both our emerging authors and our 100Kers recognized that marketing is important, and both of them engaged in marketing. However, the 100Kers engaged in paid marketing more, while the emerging authors participated mostly in organic marketing. And when we say organic marketing, that's marketing that takes time and resources, but not actual dollars or money. So if you look at the chart, what you can see is that 100Kers spent more of their marketing on discount deal sites, Facebook ads, and Amazon ads. All three of those require some outlay of cash. When it comes to deal sites, it could be as low as $10 or $25. In the case of many of our sites, that's where the prices start to promote your book. And when it comes to Facebook and Amazon ads, you can be spending anywhere from $5 to $10 a day to upwards of hundreds or thousands of dollars a day. And so 100Kers take the time to set up these ads. They spend money on a recurring basis on these types of ads and promotions, and that helps lead to more success for them. Emerging authors spend more of their time doing things like in-person promotions and book signings, and spent more time on social media, so maybe posting to Facebook or posting to Twitter and doing some book giveaways. But these are slightly less effective, especially in our experience when it comes to social media, because when you post to Twitter or Facebook, the number of people who actually see your post is very, very low. Whereas if you post to Facebook or Twitter or Amazon, and then you pay to make sure that that post gets in front of people, you're actually guaranteeing that you will have some reach and that people will see what you're posting. So this slide just summarizes what we've just said. The three techniques that 100Kers use more are the deal sites, Facebook ads, Amazon ads, three techniques that emerging authors use: in-person signings, social media, and book giveaways. So the big takeaway here is that paid marketing, paid placements do work. And more importantly, they're actually scalable. They're more scalable than organic marketing. If you post something to Twitter and you reach 10 or 20 people, that's it. You've reached 10 or 20 people. Whereas if you run Facebook ads at $5, $10, $15 a day, every single day you're reaching those people, and you can continue to reach those people and increase your spend to reach even more people down the road. And here's just in their own words. So one of our 100K authors said, marketing is important, so learn how to do it, but don't spend all your time doing it. And our data supports this. 100Kers said that they engaged in their own marketing, they spent time marketing, but they only spent about 27% of their time marketing. So as a rule of thumb, spend 3/4 of your time writing and actually getting that book done, and then spend 1/4 of your time marketing that book and getting it in front of your readers.
All right, great. So our next point has to do with how books are published and how authors choose to get their book out there. And so there's a couple of details here that I'll explain that may be sort of review for some of the authors listening to this, but I think it's important to define all our terms to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. So KDP stands for Kindle Direct Publishing. And using Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, you can publish your book. Now, within Kindle Direct Publishing, there's a program called KDP Select. Now, KDP Select requires that your book be exclusive to Amazon, which means it can't be published anywhere else. And in exchange for that, it provides some unique marketing opportunities. It allows you to do countdown deals. It allows you to make your book free for short periods of time. And it lets you get into Amazon's new Kindle Unlimited program, which is their version of Netflix for books. Now, we talk to authors, and this sort of decision over whether to go KDP Select, which means exclusive to Amazon, or to cast a wider net and go to Nook, Kobo, Apple iBooks, Google Books as well. And so that decision is sort of called going KDP Select or going wide. And we hear a lot about that when we talk to authors. Anecdotally, they tell us, that's a big decision. It's something that people want advice on, which is why we decided to include it in this talk. And so, what you can see here is that KDP Select enrollment is actually the same between both groups. Now, overall, in both groups, more people have opted to go the KDP Select Amazon exclusive route than to go wide. That said, you can see that people are having success in both buckets. And so what the kind of conclusion that we've made here is that they're both options for you. So no matter which way you choose, if you feel like going exclusive is going to help you out, then that's a way you can have success. If you feel like going wide is better, also a way you can have success. So the good news is, whichever way you're doing it, you're not doing it wrong. The bad news is you're going to need to experiment to figure out which way actually works the best for you. And because it was the same between both groups for us, the data didn't tell us exactly what the best option is here. But anecdotally, from talking to authors, what we've heard is that going the KDP Select route might be better for you if you have just one book, if you're very early on in your career. The reason being, that's going to get you into the Kindle Unlimited pool of authors, or pool of books rather. And what that means is it's going to make your book discoverable. So when people are going to grab a book from Kindle Unlimited, your book is available to them, and you get paid out on the borrows and the pages read from when people borrow your book. And that means that you don't actually have to sort of close a whole sale in order to get someone to look at your book, which is really important when you're first starting out. So the data says there's no wrong way to do it. And anecdotally, we found that it might be best if you have a small catalog to experiment with KDP Select.
Okay, finding or secret number 5. Now, this finding was not surprising, but it's always good to share and talk about it, which is you have to put in the hours. So if you look at the 100Kers and how long they're spending writing their books, they're spending about 33 hours per week on average, versus the emerging authors who are only spending just under 20 hours per week writing their book. When it comes to marketing, there's a little bit less of a difference, with the 100Kers spending about 12 hours a week and the emerging authors spending 10. But what you see on very right is that the 100Kers are publishing have on average 33 books published versus 7 from the emerging authors. And that makes sense when you look at how much more time the 100Kers are putting into actually writing their books. And we do know that the more titles you have under your belt and the deeper your backlist, the more successful you're going to be. One, because you just have more content out there for people to be reading, and 2, when you do engage in marketing activities, you get economies of scale. So you might run a marketing promotion on one title, but then people discover that book and go on to read through all of your backlist. So the return on that dollar that you invested in marketing is going to be greater the more books you have, versus if you only have one book and you market that book, the return is going to be lower. So here's just a summary of what we talked about. 100Kers put in 33 hours actually writing their book and 12 hours marketing their book. So that's about 45 hours a week. So they really are doing this full time. And the average 100Ker has a lot of books under their belt. So extra hours lead to more books, which means that you have more success, as we talked about within the marketing. Now here's some advice from a 100Ker. Write every day. Don't wait for inspiration. If you were an accountant, you wouldn't wait until you were inspired to go to work. And so the data does say that 100Kers spend more time writing, and they have their philosophy about this is that it is a job. They get up every single day and they do it. Now, some of you listening, and some emerging authors, cannot work 45 hours a week on their book because you might have actual day jobs that are paying the bills. And that's okay. This is aspirational and where eventually you're going to get to. So if you currently do have a day job, that's fine. Write as many hours that you can, get those books out there, and then eventually as those books start to generate revenue, you can start making a living off of them. You can then go down to part-time on your current job and eventually quit that job and become a full-time writer like many of these 100Kers are doing.
Great. So our next point is about editing. And this is at Written Word Media, we're marketers at heart, and editing is something that happens before a book gets published. But it's something that when we talk to authors, they really want to know about, and it's a very important step in the publishing process. So we wanted to ask about it, and we're glad we did, because the results were really, really clear. And so you can see from this, the emerging authors, 41% of them are spending under $50 for editing. And you've got to imagine what you're going to get if you pay under $50 for editing, which probably means you're getting a friend or a family member to do the editing. Maybe you're doing it yourself. Maybe you figured out some other way to basically pay nothing for editing. And it's understandable because, you've put in a lot of time and money and effort into your book. Editing usually comes at the end of that process. And, the thought of spending a few more weeks and some more money on it can be daunting. That said, you can see it's clear that 100Kers spend money on professional editors. In fact, over 50% of them hire a professional editor and spend between $250 and $500. So the really important thing about this is really that price. And so if you're an emerging author and you're trying to think, how much should I pay for editing? If somebody tells you, hey, editing your book's going to cost $2,000, you're going to say, forget it, I'm not paying that. But if somebody says it's going to charge you $250 or $300, $400, now that you have this data, all of a sudden that starts to make sense. And it's actually something that lines up nicely with what the 100Kers are doing. And so it's an important step. It's one that we feel, really confident that we advise you to do. And, with some of the recent rules on Amazon cracking down on grammar and errors in books, it's even more important to have a professional editor. And at $250 on the low end, you don't have to break the bank to get your book professionally edited, but it is worthwhile hiring a pro. So just a few more points on this. 96% of the 100Kers chose a professional editor. So that is almost every single one of them. So this is clearly a very important step. And then, the price range, $250 to $500, that's the sweet spot for 100Kers. And I think that's a really good data point to know. You can file that away in your head and use that when you're negotiating with potential editors. And, emerging authors tend to, spend a lower dollar amount. And while we certainly understand people's financial restrictions, this is something to consider. If you do have a little bit of extra money, it might be important to spend it here.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our 6 secrets of successful authors. And so we'll do a quick summary here, and then we will let you go on your way. So to recap, we said it takes time to be successful. So if you'll remember, most of the 100Kers have been at this for 3 years or more. So if you're in the under 3-year mark, keep at it. If you're just getting started, know that this is going to take a little bit more time and you're not going to hit it big necessarily in the first 12 months.
And, just point number 2, indie publishing is the most viable first step. So regardless of whether or not eventually you want to be traditional or stay indie, indie publishing is the new pathway to either end result. So that's something that's new in the market. Just make sure to know that.
Secret number 3, paid marketing is critical to success. So you've got to market. How you market is really important, and investing some dollars into the paid side of marketing is going to give you your best payoff. You don't have to invest a ton. You can start with maybe $5, $10 a day, but you're better off doing that than spending hours and hours on social media hoping that somebody's going to see what you're writing or hoping that your post goes viral.
And then, going exclusive to KDP Select or staying wide, casting a wider net with Nook and Apple and so on and so forth are both options. It's a personal decision for every author. We hear anecdotally that, KDP Select might be a good way to start if you've got a very small catalog. But again, it's something you'll need to experiment with yourself.
And you have to put in the hours. So our 100Kers are doing this full time. They're working about 45 hours a week. The more you write, the more books you have, the more successful you will be. So figure out what is doable for you. Set that as your goal every week. Maybe it's 20 hours, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 60. And then really stick to that, because that's going to be your path to success.
And lastly, we looked at editing and hire a professional editor. And remember the price point that we put out there. Most 100Kers are paying between $250 and $500 for a professional editor. So you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get your book edited, but it is probably worth spending a few $100s rather than doing it yourself or having a friend or family member doing it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We had a lot of fun presenting this information to you, and we hope that it's been really helpful.
And just as a reminder, the full article will be available in a few weeks at writtenwordmedia.com. You can sign up for email notifications there to get notified when the full article is published, or to download a copy of this presentation and get all the notes and things that we went over today. You can go to writtenwordmedia.com/indiefringe, and we'll email you the full copy of the presentation.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.